So I just want to welcome everyone to our presentation today through the Agriculture Working Group of the Association for Baha'i Studies. Today's really a culmination of a lot of work, many years of work for Winnie. We're happy to have her today to talk about and to present some of the writings and some discussion from the new compilation that's to be released in January through the U.S. Publishing Trust, entitled Food, Farmer and Community, Agriculture and the Reconstruction of the World. I am Dawn Egerton. I'm the convener of and point person for the Agriculture Working Group. And there are other members of our convening team. I think Winnie, you'll probably introduce them, and they're going to be participating in the reading today. So we're so happy to have you here today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Winnie.
I'm Winnie, and I know many of you, and I'm glad to see some new faces. I want to thank Dawn especially because she's been my sidekick in this process for several years, and also for today's presentation, she's the artistic director and tech person of this PowerPoint that you're going to be seeing. So several of the people who are on the convening team will be readers today. The first one is Janet Kundal, but I don't see Janet on yet. And then Karen Olson, Neil Macmillan, Alberta Telfer, and then Ned, Janet's husband, is in England. And so we'll hope that we get them on. If not, we'll read the part that they were going to read. And my granddaughter Haley Grace is here to help us stay in a timely way. So she'll be ringing a little chime, which tells us when the time is up for answering something. Yeah, but we may go over. All right. So we're going to be looking at some key concepts of this compilation called Food, Farmer and Community, Agriculture and Reconstruction of the World. And each concept is going to be followed by comments from you. So when you want to comment, please go down to the bottom of your screen, at least that's where mine is, to the reactions button and raise your hand, and that way you'll come up to the front where we can see you. And so this is going to be an hour-and-a-half session, and it is recorded and will be available on YouTube when Dawn is able to process it and get it up there. And as you've seen in the invitation, there are many good presentations on YouTube, including several from friends that are on this webinar today. So we're going to begin with an excerpt from a talk and a prayer by Abdu'l-Baha, and is so often the case, he's going to use agricultural metaphors as he prays for the two North American nations. I'm going to ask if Janet has come on. Janet, are you with us? You may have to unmute if you are.
She's not in the list of participants.
All right, so Johanna, will you please go ahead?
Praise be to God. I find these two great American nations highly capable and advanced in all that appertains to progress and civilization. These governments are fair and equitable. The motives and purposes of these people are lofty and inspiring. Therefore, it is my hope that these revered nations may become prominent factors in the establishment of international peace and the oneness of the world of humanity, that they may lay the foundations of equality and spiritual brotherhood among mankind. O my Lord, thou who art ever forgiving, verily this assembly hath turned its face toward thy kingdom. Verily, they are all of thy flock, and thou art the one shepherd of all. O thou real shepherd, educate and train thy sheep in thy green and verdant pastures. Suffer these birds of thine to build their nests in thy rose garden. Adorn thine orchard with these fresh plants and flowers. Refresh these human trees by thy shower of beneficence and favor. O God, we are all, verily, we are all thy servants, all thine, and thou art the one Lord. We all adore thee, and thou art the beneficent Master. O Lord, render the eyes perceptive that we may witness the lights of thy kingdom. Render the ears attentive that they may hear the heavenly summons. Resuscitate the spirits that they may be exhilarated through the breath of the Holy Spirit. O Lord, verily we are weak, but thou art almighty. We're poor, but thou art rich. Have mercy upon us. Portion unto us a goodly share of thy realities, and lead us into the arena of thine attainments. Thou art the powerful. Thou art the able. Thou art the kind Lord.
Thank you, Joe. In January, the U.S. Publishing Trust is going to release this updated compilation, Food, Farmer, and Community, Agriculture, and the Reconstruction of the World, with a foreword by Paul Hanley. And I'm indebted to Paul because long ago he understood and was trying to educate all of us on how agriculture has to do with the covenant. The entire revelation of Baha'u'llah is of one piece, and he is showing us how we can govern ourselves in the world by putting agriculture at the top front of our thinking. This beautiful picture is of a coffee farmer in Kenya. And Holiance, who is also on our agriculture working group, is also from Kenya, by the way, and he's on our participant list today. So if you'll take a look at, take about a half a minute for these next two slides each. This is the contents that is being covered in the book. And Dawn, I'll leave it up to you to say when about a half a minute is finished and go to the next slide. So that's what's being covered in the book. And we're going to be covering just 4 areas of the human civilization and how they relate to agriculture. It may not at first seem apparent. The first one, I think many of you will know, and this is our friend Alberta, who is on the agriculture working group and on the convening team in her garden. She has a market garden. So we'll look at the next. So the Baha'i international community puts out many documents related to agriculture and social life. And this is the important one for us in the Association for Baha'i Studies, because the whole reason we have the Agriculture Working Group is so that we can learn about our area and be able to have a meaningful public discourse. Only discourse at the level of principle has the power to invoke a moral commitment, which will in turn make possible the discovery of enduring solutions to many challenges confronting a rapidly disintegrating human society. And this is a wonderful garden at the Charlotte Center in North Carolina. So now I would like to begin with the bucket labeled social. We're calling these buckets, by the way, because when you're in a garden, you are adding elements that the soil needs. And if you picture a woman farmer in a garden and she has degraded soil, she's going to add the elements that are needed to restore that soil. And so today in our buckets, we're going to have some principles that we hope will restore in your mind some elements that are necessary in the field of discourse, the soil of your own discourse. Okay, so we're going to look at one called social, and it's some of the principles necessary for creating commitment to the integration of society, and Karen is our reader.
Thank you. This quote is from the Universal House of Justice, and it says that a global civilization, which is both materially and spiritually prosperous, represents the next stage of a millennia-long process of social evolution, provides a conception of history that endows every instance of social action with a particular purpose: to foster true prosperity with its spiritual and material dimensions among the diverse inhabitants of the planet. And as the next quotation from, am I supposed to just read these questions, or am I supposed to read the other part first?
Yeah, it's to get us familiar with the quote that you're going to read, and then we will consider these after the quote. So
Okay, great.
it's for people to be thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to read in the next slide a familiar quotation from the Tablet of the World. So keep in mind that we can never be certain how these principles will be demonstrated in the future, but think what your comment may be to these following questions. Imagine some reasons that special regard for agriculture precedes the promotion of the lesser peace. Imagine how the principle of one common language could assist special regard for agriculture. What relationship can agriculture have to spiritual qualities of fellowship, kindliness, and unity? How could a special regard for agriculture influence the education of children and those who contribute to it? Give examples, however small, of governments paying special regard to agriculture. In the Tablet of the World, Baha'u'llah addresses the Shah of Persia on what he identifies as a vital and important matter. Whilst in the prison of Akka, we revealed the crimson book, that which is in the crimson book, that which is conducive to the advancement of mankind and to the reconstruction of the world. The utterances set forth therein by the pen of the Lord of creation include the following, which constitute the fundamental principles for the administration of the affairs of men. First, it is incumbent upon the ministers of the House of Justice to promote the lesser peace, so that the people of the earth may be relieved from the burden of exorbitant expenditures. This matter is imperative and absolutely essential, inasmuch as hostilities and conflict lie in the root, at the root of affliction and calamity. Second, languages must be reduced to one common language to be taught in all the schools of the world. Third, it behooveth man to adhere tenaciously unto that which will promote fellowship, kindliness, and unity. Fourth, everyone, whether man or woman, should hand over to a trusted person a portion of what he or she earneth through trade, agriculture, or other occupation for the training and education of children, to be spent for this purpose with the knowledge of the trustees of the House of Justice. Fifth, special regard must be paid to agriculture. Although it hath been mentioned in the fifth place, unquestionably it precedeth the others.
Thank you, Karen. And that is most likely familiar to many of you. It is for many of us the basic writing which tells us that agriculture is related to governance and to how we run our affairs. So we don't know what it means in the future, but we're going to try to imagine something that it might relate to. So we'll be looking at those elements. And the first one, we're going to have about 1 minute for each of these, which isn't very long, a total of 5 minutes here. Haley Grace will be our timekeeper. When you hear the chime, you'll know we're almost finished with that particular reflection. And if you have something to offer, and please don't be shy, go to the reactions at the bottom of the screen and raise your hand so we can call on you. Thank you, Joe. You're right there. Hang on just a minute while I read this one again. Imagine some reasons that special regard for agriculture precedes the promotion of the lesser peace. Now I'm going to let each of you besides Joe think about that for about a little bit, and then we'll go ahead. Just a moment. All right, Haley Grace, let's time it. Go ahead, Joe, unmute yourself.
Seems to me working in a garden is very conducive to building community and a sense of oneness. Peace requires unity, and unity requires justice. So special regards to agriculture, one of those things to consider is food justice and equitable distribution of resources and wealth that are part of basic human needs and human rights, which is a prerequisite for unity, which is facilitated by garden work together, which then is facilitates peace.
Thank you. And I did not write his script, folks. Anyone else want to answer that? Had something to offer, please. All right, we'll go on. Could you hear the chime? Is anyone?
I heard it.
Did you hear it? Okay.
It's very faint, but I heard it.
But she'll do it a little bit more the next time. All right. Imagine how the principle of one common language could assist special regard for agriculture? Please raise your hand if you have a thought about that. Let's not go there yet, Dawn. Yeah. Sandra has an idea. Sandra, please unmute yourself and share with us. Sandra, how?
So with a common language, it would be much easier to share information, ideas, knowledge, education across many different groups of people. Language can still serve as quite a barrier to communicating both thoughts and feelings and technical information as well. So a common language would really assist that process.
Yes. Thank you. Another thought? Karen has a thought. Let's listen to hers and then we'll go on. And Neil, can you hold that thought?
Mine's
Or
super
no.
brief. Mine's super brief. Just thinking that, you know, if learning about agriculture were actually done farmer to farmer, you know, because there's so much rich knowledge within farmers. And if we had one common language, that would be much easier, and preserving, of course, all of the wonderful language diversity that also exists, but having an auxiliary language.
Thank you. Neil?
So I work in the language field as a translator, and I'm also a member of the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists. And one thing about agriculture is that every country of the world has its own agricultural system. And for those of us looking at an international perspective on agriculture, the terms are actually it's very clear what terms we need to know in agriculture, like what do you call a potato in Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of basically a common vocabulary where we know our native language, and then we know this common term for fertilizer, it would be very, very unifying. And I know the problem with our International Federation of Agricultural Journalists is not very inclusive. For example, the French are not members for some TIFF we had a few years ago. So I really see a place for developing the language, this language component to actually help agriculture. I think it's a reciprocal relationship between these principles. I think the common language affects agriculture and vice versa.
Thank you. Thank you. So does someone have a notion about how it can relate to the spiritual qualities of fellowship, kindliness, and unity? Okay, Sandra. Sandra, you have your hand up. Is it still up from the last time?
Yeah, I thought it would cancel it by itself,
Oh,
but
okay,
it
there's
doesn't
one
seem
down.
to have.
Go back in the reactions and you'll see how to cancel. Arthur,
Okay.
please.
Well, of course, agriculture produces food. Food is essential for our survival. And so often, you know, it's over meals that we have fellowship, that we show kindness and sharing. We can't have unity in the world if people are starving or hungry. So without agriculture meeting that fundamental need of all humanity, these other qualities have difficulty in generating. We get stress and conflict instead. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Geraldine, is that about agriculture and the spiritual qualities?
Yes, I was just thinking about how it's such a natural venue and occupation that has a long tradition of people working together to, you know, harvest, to put a barn up. So it is a natural gathering area where this fellowship, kindliness, and unity certainly in the past was promoted very well.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now, how could special regard for agriculture influence the education of children and those who contribute to it? Let's see, Geraldine, you're still up there. Do you have a thought, or
No,
shall we go to?
Go to someone else, sorry.
All right,
Put
Conta?
it down.
Thank you. I had actually been thinking about this, and I even shared it at the Bahá'í Center in Charlotte. And that teaching children how to plant things and grow things in the garden can also be incorporated to spiritual education by using the metaphors that Abdul Baha uses. Just as like when they are putting a seed in the ground, they can combine the teaching that the heart is the soil and whatever we plant in the heart, and then how we take care of that which we plant will grow and bring fruits. Like if a child puts a tomato plant seed and then it watches to grow, and then constantly talking, about the writings and how the plant grows and how the human being grows at the same time, and it makes an analogy to the growth of the plant that they're taking care of. I just wanted to share that, and I think they're doing that at the Bahá'í Center with the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Joe?
In addition to the metaphors, you can also, I think, teach virtues to children by growing things like patience and taking care of things. And I was thinking about the Hopis have this phrase called Techqua Ikachi, which means cultivate the earth and celebrate life. I mean, all in one word, in one phrase. And as I kind of understand it or simplified, the Hopi idea is that everybody should plant one seed and pray it up every day. I mean, in their promised land of this American Southwest, in order for the crops to grow, you got to pray them up. And so if kids were encouraged to at least plant one seed a year and pray it up, that would connect them to the soil and also would connect them to spirit.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to our last, where Baha'u'llah is speaking to the Shah and says that the government should pay special regard to agriculture. And let's hear some examples. Quanta, your hand is still up. Do you want to start us off?
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah. Well, maybe you have some ideas. How are governments right now perhaps paying special regard to agriculture? Or Deborah has her hand up. Let's hear from Deborah.
Yeah, I'm having trouble fitting my ideas into these specific questions, but I want to say I don't think in the United States government is paying enough attention to agriculture, especially when we talk about water quality, the whole pipeline debacle that finally split, and now they're talking about digging up Iowa and putting some kind of cable for the windmills. That plus allowing industrialized farming to take over the farmland, I don't think is conducive to healthy food, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess becoming aware, and I'm not sure when we have special interests involved, I'm not sure how popular voices are going, I think just with enough popular voices, maybe there'll be enough change. Anyway, that's one thought. I have a lot of other
Thank you. Gary.
Mute, okay. I'll follow up on Deborah and agree with her 100%. Actually, governments do perhaps have engaged in agriculture, but I'm not sure I would use the word special regard in the context of today's issues and everything else. I mean, even as I think many know, I grew up in agriculture in Virginia, North Carolina, and but since that time, we've seen so many changes that we've seen that the corporate monopolies that exist in agriculture have more or less taken over much of the, let's say, United States and other countries. And but not only that, but living and working here in Ukraine and working with development of agriculture here in Ukraine, same thing happened. Is that as the country left communistic system and began to develop the agriculture on the farms that they had developed into so-called cooperatives, but they were not cooperatives. What we've seen is that the massive buyers and Syngentas of the world have slowly taken over a lot of the agriculture here and continues to do so. So we see this happening on a global basis. And we know, if we follow climate change activities, that this is going to produce serious issues in the coming decades. 100% scientific, I would say, agreement about that.
Thank you, Gary. Now we're going to move on to our next bucket, which contains spiritual principles. And Neil is going to be our reader. So we'll look at this first slide, the next one, which will tell us what we're going to be thinking about while he reads the writings. Go ahead, Neil.
Imagine the future relationship between agriculture in a village or city and the magical Asgard. Or you may comment regarding those that have already been built. The oneness of mankind. This is a message, from the Universal House of Justice, 20th October 1983, to the Baha'is of the world. This was the original social development message, I believe. The oneness of mankind, which is at once the operating principle and ultimate goal of his revelation, implies the achievement of a dynamic coherence between the spiritual and practical requirements of life on earth. The indispensability of this coherence is unmistakably illustrated in his ordination of the magical Asgard, the spiritual center of every Baha'i community, round which must flourish dependencies dedicated to the social, humanitarian, educational, and scientific advancement of mankind. Second quotation is Shoghi Effendi, Baha'i Administration. Nothing short of direct and constant interaction between the spiritual forces emanating from this house of worship, centering in the heart of the magical Asgard, and the energies consciously displayed by those who administer its affairs in their service to humanity, can possibly provide the necessary agency capable of removing the ills that have so long and so grievously afflicted humanity.
Next slide.
These dependencies associated with the magical Asgard, centers of education and scientific learning, as well as cultural and humanitarian endeavor, embody the ideals of social and spiritual progress to be achieved through the application of knowledge, and demonstrate how, when religion and science are in harmony, they elevate the station of the human being and lead to the flourishing of civilization. That's taken from the Universal House of Justice message to the Baha'is in Iran, December 18, 2014.
And this
That's
photo.
a picture in Ukraine.
Yes, this
Wow.
is Gary's camp
Oh,
of youth.
hey.
So, yes. Thank you, Neil. All right, so let's look at what we're going to imagine about the future relationship between agriculture in a village or city and the Mashriq al-Azkar. And you could comment on those that have already been built. So let's see who would like to comment first. And we have 5 minutes, so we can take some time on this one. Notice the word imagine. If you want to raise your hand, look down at the reactions button. Sandra, please.
I don't know if I read this somewhere at some point, but a community in the South Pacific that gathered at the Mashrukalazkar on a daily basis before they went out into the fields to do the farm laboring. And that just really appeals to me.
Thank you. Deborah? Unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. Well, not exactly the Mashrukalazkar, but I think the precursor to that is the kinds of is grassroots kinds of activities that we're seeing here in Cincinnati among an interfaith group. We don't have a very strong, in fact, we have a very weak Baha'i community here. However, there's a very strong interfaith group that's very active. And we've started an organization called Faith Communities Go Green that's under the umbrella organization in the city called Green Umbrella. And the things that we're doing is coordinating among the community gardens to educate people how to grow food, gleaning from farms in the rural areas just outside the city, gleaning the produce that's left and then distributing that to people that need it, teaching community gardening. In fact, there's creation of hub gardens, which is the gardens are, we're trying to make them connected and then have one where you teach people how to use the food. Then there's the Civic Garden Center, which does teach people how to use food and how to, how to grow it and how to use it. And then there's the Rothenberg Rooftop Garden, which is a school in the city that actually built a garden on the roof, and it teaches children how to garden and invites the parents to come and learn how to use tomatoes. And they like, it's a Black area, and they have a lot of unfamiliar food that they don't know how to cook and that sort of thing. So I think this sort of activity is it's doing a lot of things. I mean, it's bringing religious people together and it's in service and creating a groundwork for ways to distribute food and to teach people how to grow there. So I think a Mashrukalazkar will do exactly that sort of thing.
Thank you. Paula?
Yeah, I know that at the House of Worship in Santiago, Chile, they have quite an extensive nursery where they're raising lots of plants, and the landscaping around the House of Worship, these are all indigenous plants. They have started to reforest behind the House of Worship on those bare mountain slopes of the Andes. There's a reforestation project that they are using the seedlings they have in the nursery. And the Baha'i community, they also donated 1,000 trees, small trees, to the city of Santiago.
Thank you. Arthur?
Well, we know that there should be a Mashrukalazkar in every community. And since one of the dependencies should be a center of research and knowledge, this really means that every community should have a capacity to do scientific research on the problems that they're facing in their own community. It's not just something in some faraway research center. It should become part of every community's activities. And so therefore, one can imagine that there's an agricultural problem locally. There should be local researchers who can help immediately to find a solution to it and improve it, adapted to their own local situation. So it's part of that whole vision of communities everywhere being responsible for these things, and not just a few specialist experts in some distant place. Thank you.
Thank you. And Delhi?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I was just thinking it's the same line as Arthur, that first of all, the matriculate car is, I always look at it in terms of the way that the Muslims get up every day in the morning at 5 a.m. and go to the mosque to pray. And I was always asking why they have to do that. And when I started studying in the Ruhi books, the importance of the matriculate car, I realized that that's the source of inspiration. That's where we get our guidance and inspiration, our creativity, everything that is supposed to make life meaningful. And so, to me, I don't see any place better than having these activities around the place where we gain our inspiration, so that as we come out of the temple where we have meditated and gain insights, we come out and put those insights into practice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
All right. Well, we've found some very interesting thoughts in our spiritual bucket. So now let's move on to the scientific bucket and see what elements we might need for the soil of our discourse. And Alberta will be reading for us. This is the principle that we're going to be studying.
Yeah, so I guess as we study this principle, we're going to imagine how the principles could be used in discourse to further illuminate and elevate the station of the farmer. With whom might you have the discourse? These are some of my dear friends who keep bees at my market garden. And now, all from Abdul Baha, all created things are captives of nature and subject to its laws. They cannot transgress the control of these laws in one detail or particular. But man, through the exercise of his scientific intellectual power, can rise out of this condition, can modify, change, and control nature according to his own wishes and uses. Science, so to speak, is the breaker of the laws of nature.
Next slide.
Amazing.
What bounty greater than this, that science should be considered as an act of worship and art as service to the kingdom of God. All these endless beings which inhabit the world, whether man, animal, vegetable, mineral, whatever they may be, are surely, each one of them, composed of elements. There is no doubt that this perfection, which is in all beings, is caused by the creation of God from the composing elements, by their appropriate mingling and proportionate quantities, the mode of their composition and the influence of other beings. For all beings are connected together like a chain, and reciprocal help, assistance, and interaction belonging to the properties of things are the causes of the existence, development, and growth of created beings. It is confirmed through evidences and proofs that every being universally acts upon other beings, either absolutely or through association. From some answered questions. And here's a picture of Unity Garden, I guess, in Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's the same one associated with the Baha'i Center there that Qantas spoke about. Thank you, Alberta. So let's go back to our thoughts about imagining how these principles could be used in discourse to further illuminate and elevate the station of the farmer. And with whom might you have this discourse? And notice that this is coming from our friend in Norway, Bjorn. Thank you. And we have 5 minutes for this. And Deli, still, you have your hand up. Do you want to speak about this one?
No, I put down my hand. Sorry.
All right. Dee has some thoughts.
For many years, I have worked with communications to establish a link between farmers and consumers, particularly consumers in cities who don't understand or appreciate what farmers do. And in working with the distinguished chef, he made a very marvelous comment about this. He said, today, when you talk about things, farmers are the rock stars. And what we need to do is recognize the many, many difficulties and positive aspects that they deal with as they try to get product to us. The distribution system here in the US is a tricky one, but the farmers hold a unique role. In many ways, they're isolated, they work alone, but with the land and animals, which is the basis of everything. But I think for all of us to recognize the role of the farmer, and then also the role that science plays in the farmer's work. Agriculture is indeed a science, and there are so many aspects to it: soil, water, climate, animal husbandry, seed development, that it's really the essential science.
Thank you. Yes. We have some people on here who are scientists in that field. Would you like to comment? Does anyone have an idea who they could speak with about the scientific aspects of agriculture and how it might relate to social and spiritual principles, for instance? All right. Ndeli, please.
Yeah, naturally, this discussion should take place with the farmers. But I think it depends on the context and the environment, because I realize that there are so many people involved in the process, especially in the developing world, in a way that the farmers themselves are hardly reached because of access and because of their level of education. So you tend to have to go through so many intermediaries who might not appreciate the discussion as much as the farmers themselves, who are directly involved and who are concerned with the issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Gary.
It strikes me that agriculture, the farming, is the perfect metaphor for human life on the planet and our necessary relationship with the planet, in terms of, if we nurture it, it will nurture us. And all of the human qualities, the virtues, are necessary in that process. The science tells us the relationships that are necessary with the earth, the nutrients, the methods, the technologies that make that endeavor, make agriculture possible. And the human qualities and virtues are what make the relationship of people with the farmer and people with themselves to make agriculture possible, both in terms of production and consumption.
Thank you. Karen.
Yeah, so for this question, I put a practical aspect, I work with the agriculture research extension group called the Battle River Research Group out of Forestburg, Alberta, Canada. So we do plot research with forages and with grains, and it's a farmer-led research group that actually is part of, we're actually about 10 others who are in Alberta who do the same thing. So we work with farmers, and the farmers are the board of directors, so they direct what we do and where we get our research funding from. And we do things with growing crops and growing and forages, and of course extension activities to help with farmers and with other people who are interested in agriculture in finding out better ways to produce and to work with the land and to look after the soil and their animals and all that. So I think that's kind of my contribution to this this question here. Is just through my started with the Battle River Research Group here, doing the discourse to illuminate and elevate the station of the farmer. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Gwanta?
I just shared a PDF file from a farmer a long time ago in Iowa, Herman Warsaw. I learned about him in the courses that I took at the crop science department at NC State, that in fact he was teaching scientists about how to take care of the soil. So I think the scientists in the lab and the farmers in the field actually have a symbiotic relationship. And one sometimes think the scientists have a rank, but in fact, I think they're working together. I just wanted to comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Deborah? And then we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think Karen mentioned the extension part of university research, and I'm a Master Gardener volunteer, which is connected to Extension Service all over the country. And I guess it's a 100-year-old program or older than that. But we're empowered to study the research and then try to educate people like our neighbors about these issues. And because Cincinnati is so close to farmland, we're able to also connect people with farms because I think this question was about discourses, talking to people about the quality of food and directing them to some of the information that the Extension Service provides about pollinators and about locally grown food and et cetera. The quality of food, the wanton use of chemicals, the issue of pollinators. And we also have the Ohio River, where we get our water supply, which is continually threatened by the factories and the coal mines farther east. So there's a lot of worry about, water quality. So all of these things, I think, are fodder for any kind of discourse to make people more aware. And my experience is people are very resistant to having to change what they're doing, especially when you talk to them about lawns. That's the worst. And that isn't it, that's a big issue too.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to mention that Bjorn has told us that this is her husband in Norway feeding the, what might go into a compost bucket is going to be feeding the cows there in the dairy. All right, we'll move on now to what many people out in the public might think has no relationship to agriculture. They just haven't understood. And that's the bucket of economic principles. And as we look at this, you might find some of the writings familiar because last month, Karen Olson did a program on the village storehouse which is now on our YouTube site on the invitation that you answered to get on your Zoom. And so please be thinking about how these following comments, and I believe we need someone to read these. I don't see Ned. Ned, are you here? Ned was going to read for us. He's over in England and perhaps he couldn't get on. Gary Colliver, are you okay with reading this slide and then several readings?
Sure.
All right.
Economic. What are some key principles of economics that indicate the future state of agriculture in a golden age? How might you use some of the principles in a conversation with a village council member who is worried about the future of her small town that is surrounded by abandoned farms while the owners work in the city to earn enough to feed their families?
Yes, and then we're going to have several things to read, Gary. And so next slide, please.
The question of economics must commence with the farmer and then be extended to the other classes, inasmuch as the number of farmers is greater than all other classes, many, many times greater. Therefore, it is fitting that the economic problem be first solved with the farmer, for the farmer is the first active agent in the body politic. Abdu'l Baha to an individual believer.
Yes, and this is Bill Hazen, who also gave us a wonderful presentation that's now on YouTube. Bill is in Ontario. Thank you. Next one.
In brief, from among the wise men in every village, a board should be set up, and the affairs of that village should be under the control of that board. Likewise, a general storehouse should be founded with the appointment of a secretary. At the time of the harvest, under the direction of that board, a certain percentage of the entire harvest should be appropriated for the storehouse. Abdu'l Baha, additional tablets, extracts, and talks.
Next one.
A certain amount must be put aside from the general storehouse for the orphans of the village, and a certain sum for the incapacitated. A certain amount must be provided from the storehouse for those who are needy and incapable of earning a livelihood, and a certain amount for the village's system of education. And a certain amount must be set aside for the administration of public health. If anything is left in the storehouse, that must be transferred to the general treasury of the nation for national expenditures.
And these photos from Bosnia are from our friend Laurent Mesbah, who teaches young children there to grow things, as well as his many other duties. Next.
When the love of God is.
Wait,
this is the
sorry.
next.
Yes, that's right. Go ahead. I made a mistake. Go ahead, Gary.
When the love of God is established, everything else will be realized. This is the true foundation of all economics. Reflect upon it. Endeavor to become the cause of the attraction of souls rather than to enforce minds.
Yes. Vanuatu.
Yeah.
Next one.
After detailed explanation of how the taxation would work, Abdu'l-Baha states, these are only the preliminary principles. The House of Justice will arrange and widen them in accordance with time and place.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Yes, so now we have about 5 minutes to consider what these principles that some people may put just in an economic silo or an economic isolation have to do with our bucket that's going to help our degraded understanding of the field of agriculture. So how are we going to use it in discourse? What are some of the key principles of economics that indicate the future state of agriculture in a golden age? And how might you use some of the principles in a conversation with a village council member who's worried about the future of her small town that's surrounded by abandoned farms while the owners work in city to earn enough to feed their families? And so we'll have 5 minutes for this. And hopefully you will have been thinking of some of this since you participated in Karen's presentation on the village storehouse. All right, Gary, you have your hand up.
Abdu'l-Baha's statement that the number of farmers is great, is the greatest of all the classes of people in society has always intrigued me. And the reason we have abandoned farms is that the system of agriculture, particularly in this country, is stacked against the small farmer. And it's the economic system that does that. So if we're going to change that, we have to change our way of thinking about agriculture in a fundamental way, and understanding that relationship of agriculture being at the base, and that really everyone should be involved in agriculture, and particularly farmers. And the system should be structured such that it doesn't have to eliminate these small farmers.
Thank you. And Gary Rouchet in Ukraine.
I always forget to unmute. This is a wide question, but I also often like to say that I think we need to see things in a systems format, not just individual elements of any particular question. When I look at economics, of course, from the point of view of agriculture, one of the things we see is, of course, that the way that the business activities have developed for the past 50 years in many countries around the world, not everywhere, but in many countries around the world, like North America, the corporate activities have begun to overwhelm, I think, some of the effects of the small and medium farmer. And so actually many of them are become almost like sharecroppers, because they have to receive this particular input and that particular, and they have to market through that particular channels. And under these, all of these are actually quite underneath the capacity of the large corporates that have begun to overtake much of the world in different places. But the other part, when we talk about the systems, I would also say is that, we have been talking about this in various courses, that, over the last 50 or 60 years, we've seen an increase, of course, in consumerism and different kinds of activities in the individual. Whereas, these things do not produce for us more happiness. We know that. I mean, if we have more things, it doesn't necessarily lead to more happiness. There's a lot of research about that. But if we continue to focus on developing more businesses and consumerism and production of activities like this, and that the scientific community also, from the point of view, let's say, climate change and other economic activities around the world, is leading us into various different crises in the coming decades. So there's lots of ways that economics is impacting on agriculture today. That shouldn't be really. And of course, how do we get out of that? And I think a lot of what we're hearing in this particular PowerPoint is more or less focusing on those activities, the activities, positive activities.
Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, building on what Gary said about systems and systems thinking, you know, I think about back in Abdul Baha's time, and since then, you know, the fact that we have so few farmers now is in many countries anyway, is because of fossil fuels and what fossil fuels have made possible. And we also see that now we're in this kind of global crisis that we've all co-created because of fossil fuel dependence. And, you know, when I think about 10,000 years into the future, this particular way of doing agriculture is probably a blip. And there's probably going to be very different approaches that may be, again, going back to honoring the nobility of working with one's hands and the land, and having a larger peasant class, quote unquote, peasant farmer class, because it's healthier for ecosystems and communities and earth. You know, if we mature to be able to consider all of those at once in our decisions, as opposed to whatever profit might be possible, things might look really differently.
Thanks. Deborah?
Yeah, also going back to the systems point, the basic question is, why is there so much industrial farming? And I think the answer is not only because there are fossil fuels, but because these are products, corn, wheat, and soy in the US. Those are the main products, and those are mostly grown for industrial packaged, industrialized food. I walk through the grocery store and I see nothing that I consider edible. Very little, unless I go to the organic section of the vegetables and so on. And I think one of the main things that we need to be concerned about is health and an education that you can't spend too much on fresh vegetables. Of course, you can, because they'll rot if you don't eat them soon enough. But I mean, if you buy fresh vegetables and make that a priority, and put your food dollars towards that, you'll be healthier, you'll be helping the farmer, et cetera, et cetera. So eating real food, I think, is primary, is a problem that needs to be addressed. I think it's the basic to this whole conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. Before we go on to the next, I wanted to mention that Dawn has put in the chat some links, so that if you're interested in the Wilmette course on Baha'i perspectives on agriculture and food, that's starting up, I think, the 13th of January, and it tells you how to get on that. And then there's a link to the bookstore when I think they're already taking orders, it looks like, for the book Food, Farmer, and Community. And then other people have put some useful information in there too that you might want to look at. So let's go on to Neil. You have some thoughts?
Microphone.
The question, I just want to, first of all, what a great session this has been. I find it really inspiring. Anyway, one concept, like I interview 4 farmers every month for profiles. So I just want to share some insights from this experience. First of all, local food is huge. Local food is an idea whose time has come, and this counters globalization. Globalization, you know, what does that look like and what does that mean? And this also goes along with local culture. This idea that local communities have to recover their local culture. But one of the phenomena that I've noticed is that these local farmers have dual occupations. They actually have been in IT or lawyers or whatever. But it's this phenomenon that I noticed that people working in these sort of so-called urban occupations are actually missing the land and are actually coming back to the land. And with remote work, I think this raises other sort of possibilities. So, and then the last thing I just want to share with the group is the idea of vertical farming. Plants do grow very well. You can grow beautiful vegetables with hydroponic, aquaponic methods that don't need land.
Thank you. And Deli.
Thank you, Winnie. I just wanted to say that, you know, listening to the passages from Abdul Baha that you read, if I have to have a discussion with farmers in the developing countries, say in Africa, I would be looking at the context there in places that I know. I'll be looking at more of talking to them about the importance of unity, the importance of them being united, the importance and the fact that without recognizing our common humanity, the fact that we are all interdependent on one another, it's going to be difficult for them to collaborate and do some of those things like building, working to maintain a village storehouse. I mean, these are practical things that I've seen, some of the challenges that farmers face. And even if you step in to encourage them to do it, that lack of unity is really their main drawback. So I would really, in such a discourse, I would really emphasize on the importance of the oneness of people from different tribal groups or different ethnic backgrounds, learning to work together in order for them to make progress.
Thank you. Yes. Joe.
My computer froze for a second, so I might have missed something, and I hope I don't repeat anything that someone said earlier. But I always try to remember or never forget that economy and ecology have the same root word, which means home. So we're talking about studies of relationships in our home, and then economics has to do with order in the home. And when, you know, it kind of blows me away when Abdul Baha talks about agriculture, he usually overlaps that with economics because he brings in the storehouse. And if you look at the principles he brings under the storehouse, that quote you had earlier, he points out how the storehouse supports education, healthcare, and other social services. Also, there's implications of a progressive income tax, which we really haven't seen in at least my country, the United States, for at least 40 years, and the idea of a negative income tax. I was also thinking, and bring up local food, you know, at least in the United States, probably local food was what everybody ate up until about World War II. And then you had, after that, with the year I was born, 1950, all of a sudden you started having supermarkets and big boxes selling food. You had to increase the shelf life, so you had to process the food, and then you industrialize the food to maximize profit. And then, you start advertising Wonder Bread on Howdy Doody, so kids are clamoring for the food that's not necessarily healthy because that's the one that they're being marketed to, and then it spirals to where now we have food that doesn't even look like food.
Thank you, Joe. Geraldine.
Yes, there's been so much that has gone on since I actually first put my hand up, but a couple of thoughts. Just getting back to the question about the abandoned farms and what might, like one small, what you might look at as an emerging system that we're seeing in BC a little bit here now, is that there are young people who want to have access to land, but of course land is so expensive. But then there are situations where there are people with land who want to see it used, but can't use it themselves. And these might just be very small acreages that people have, but they're just not using them. And there's now a bank that's been set up to match young people who want access to land to, to use that land. And it's in its, I think relatively early days, but seems to be, one emerging way of revitalizing areas and bringing back some more food production there, which I think is promising. And I mean, somebody was talking about dual occupation, where people with small farms had dual occupation, but occupations. But I remember we lived for 10 years in a quite a well-off rural community in Manitoba. And even farmers there with 1 and 2 sections, which was more than adequate at that time, they had, most of the wives had jobs. And it was a necessary part of family well-being, was that the wives were also working off farms. So there was always 2 occupations going on in many of those farms as well. So it's just, the small farms weren't particularly economic either, or the larger farms, I should say.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sandra.
One organization that I've come across that seems to be doing a good job of connecting people to land and land to people is Farmlink. Now, I don't know how widespread it is, whether it's mostly Ontario or Canada-wide or down into the States as well. I haven't looked at it that thoroughly. But yeah, this I see a growing need among young people wanting to connect to land and get back to the land, but not having access because land has gotten so expensive. So I think that's a really useful tool for doing that. Another organization that I came across recently was this movement of food is free. And that's really about growing gardens together on public space or unused private space, and really acknowledging that food is a basic human right and should be available to everyone, regardless of economic circumstances. So those are 2 things where I think the Baha'is might tap into and really add to those conversations and situations.
Thank you, Sandra. This has been such a rich dialogue, and I thank you all for your participation. I hope that even though we've only examined 4 areas of public discourse, I hope you can see that they all blend in together, that you have to take the entirety of the Baha'i revelation in order to understand agriculture's role in what Baha'u'llah says is conducive to the advancement of mankind and to the reconstruction of the world. The utterances which constitute the fundamental principles for the administration of the affairs of men. Wow, that's a big mouthful, but we who are on this session, I think we understand that, and I'm hoping for you each to go out and have fruitful discourses in the field, using those buckets and others that you know. I want to thank Dawn again for helping to create this presentation, and for our readers and our stand-in readers. And those of you who didn't get a chance to speak, please, if you want to talk more, let me know. Just email me and I don't set up Zoom, but if you set up Zoom, we can do Zoom. I'm very excited that we got this done. And I hope you'll also consider, oops, we've got one more hand up, but just a minute, Richard. I hope that you will also consider if the wonderful Wilmette course, which has even taken a different turn this year. And if you've taken it before, you might want to take it again because it's got a new format. And if you want to go and find the book eventually, and please read Paul Hanley's foreword for it, because Paul absolutely gets that we have to have the whole revelation in order to understand agriculture's role in reconstructing the world. Thank you. And Richard, you have your hand up.
Yes, we're talking about discourse, and I know this is a working group for the Association of Baha'i Studies, and I was wondering if this forum is open to people of the wider community to join.
Oh, yes. Please do go to the invitation where you found the Zoom. And I think, Dawn, did you put it in the chat also? Someone did, I think, how to join. Dawn, you tell us what to do next.
I believe Karen put it in the chat. It's the we have a subscribe page, and you'll see it in the chat. Karen placed it in the chat.
Okay, but if you don't see that, the invitation page, when you go to the very bottom, I think it is, you'll see how to sign up there too. Am I right about that, Dawn?
Right. If someone sends you an invitation, the subscribe page will be at the bottom of the page with a link.
There's a lot on that page, and I'm grateful to Dawn because we don't have a newsletter, but it gives you a lot of information, including the fact that we also have reading groups that go on through the year, and we'll be starting some new ones in February. So in next month, you'll have a chance to sign up if you want to. So thank you all for joining in. I want to keep this timely and appreciate your help and appreciate the help of my granddaughter. Take care.
Thank you, Haley Grace. Thank you, Winnie and Dawn. Love you all.
Thank you.
Love you.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Winnie, for
Bye-bye.
Winnie, for carrying this torch for many decades.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, you got it right. Beautiful. Beautiful.
There are many here who have carried the torch as well.
That's true.
Yes.
Thank you all.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Dawn, for all the wonderful behind the scenes.
Yep,
Yeah.
that was perfect.
Totally stunning. Yep.
Yeah.
Happy discourse, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dawn, do you need anything from us before we leave?
No,
Okay.
we're good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Dawn. Yeah.